Deputy Louise O'Reilly, please.
And I suppose my good wishes, given the day that's in it, would probably be a bit superfluous to requirements, since there's so much love already in the chamber between the two parties of government. Taoiseach, I want to raise with you the issue of cervical check. In the wake of the cervical check scandal, the buzzword about this place was confidence. However, the revelations of the past few days in respect of cervical screening do nothing but undermine the confidence in a system which can barely afford further controversy. Don't take my word for it, Taoiseach. The Irish Cancer Society have expressed worry about the delays. Yesterday, at the Health Committee, officials from the Department of Health said that no capacity analysis had been conducted into the ability of the cervical check programme to carry out extra smear tests once the free tests had been announced by the Minister for Health in April of last year. This has now resulted in a backlog of 78,000 tests, and in some women waiting up to 27 weeks for their test results. Imagine that wait, Taoiseach. That is absolutely disgraceful. Now, I happen to believe that offering free tests to women who wanted them, given the calamity that we witnessed last year in respect of cervical check, was the right thing to do. But the Minister should have ensured that the capacity was there to deliver on that, and it is patently clear now that he did not do that. It is yet another shocking example of the shambles of a system that this Minister presides over, and it is further evidence that he is not up to the job of leading our health service. Given the scale of the cervical check crisis, the very first thing that the Minister should have done before offering free smear tests, it should have been made absolutely certain that the volume of additional tests could be dealt with within the medically indicated timeframe. The position of the Department of Health is that it was impossible to quantify the uptake of repeat smear tests. This is absolute nonsense. This is a relatively recent scandal, and I'm sure you'll recall the public outcry and the interest in this subject at the time, so it is little wonder that 90,000 women availed of the offer of a free repeat test. We all now know about the Jade Goody effect, which saw an increase in 2009 of women seeking tests in the wake of the death of this young woman. It's no wonder that it happened here. It's entirely predictable that it would happen here. But what we got instead was a soundbite, but no work had been done in advance of that. We need to be able to trust the Minister for Health, the Department of Health and the HSE to respond appropriately and intelligently in a crisis. So can I ask, Taoiseach, what work was undertaken since these backlogs were reported as far back as August last year? Why has the backlog grown so continuously, almost month on month? Is it the case that no effective action was taken? And if action was taken, why are these actions not working in reducing the waiting times?
Thank you, Deputy.
Furthermore, what work is being undertaken at this moment in time to ensure that this backlog is cleared urgently and that tests are carried out within a recommended timeframe? And finally, can I ask, what is your new revised deadline for the rollout of the HPV test, since 2 deadlines have already been missed?
Well, Deputy, you're right in one thing, that the cervical check screening process doesn't need another controversy. It has been a real challenge for government, for the Department of Health, for the HSE to deal with what was an extraordinary scandal a little less than a year ago. And at all times, both the Minister and the Government have responded in a way that has tried to put women's interests first. And it was in that context that the Minister, with the support of his officials, and I'm glad it was confirmed yesterday, I think, in the Health Committee, that the Minister, unlike what was said by some in this House, was not advised by his officials not to go ahead with that wasn't the case that you made, but it was a charge that that the Leader Fianna Fáil made this week. Was not advised not to provide free out-of-cycle tests for women on a temporary basis to try to provide confidence and reassurance. That's what happened. Undoubtedly, the response to that as you've outlined, was significant as people looked for reassurance. That has put more pressure on the system. The HSE and the Department of Health are responding to that by looking for increased lab capacity to be able to deal with that significant increase, which is a combination, by the way, not just of an increase as a result of out-of-cycle free smear tests on the advice of GPs, but also an increased uptake of the test generally. And so the system has been put under a lot of extra strain. It is not easy to put expanded or new contracts in place with the labs concerned. What the HSE is now doing is prioritising, stabilising cervical check to get us back to where we should be, which is between 4 to 6 weeks of a wait, as opposed to 24 or 26 weeks, which is not acceptable and needs to be the priority now, and it is. And the way in which we are responding to that is to look for and source increased capacity so that we can get these waiting times down. In relation to the HPV, the switch to HPV testing, which of course we are committed to, international best practice would support that decision. Some countries have already moved to HPV testing, but Ireland will be one of the first movers. We have committed in this year's budget to facilitate that transition, and the preparations and scoping that's necessary to do that efficiently is underway. But also, we have to factor in the need to prioritise the stabilisation of the existing screening process, which we're doing. So I'm not in a position to give you an exact date. Those questions were asked yesterday also in the Health Committee. As soon as we have a date that we can commit to, well then of course we'll inform the House straight away.
Deputy Riley.
Taoiseach, I'm a woman that uses that service. I can say on my behalf and on behalf of women that I've spoken to, you're not really filling me with any confidence. So the wait time is now 27 weeks. That, as you said yourself, is not acceptable. And, the shaking heads, the sighing and shrugging and all of that, that's not going to help. I asked you what concrete steps are being taken. So in advance of making the offer, it's now clear that absolutely no steps were taken to ensure that there was additional capacity, despite the fact that the need for additional capacity was absolutely predictable. But we got a soundbite, no homework done in advance, no follow-up work done to date. So there's absolutely no date now for the HPV testing. Again, that has been long-fingered. Another issue of women's health, being put on the back burner. That's not acceptable. Yesterday on the news we saw a young woman who is waiting for the return of her test results now. She was told that had she had the capacity to pay for it, it would have been turned around in 2 weeks. My question is, are you doing anything concrete to ensure that this backlog is cleared as a matter of urgency and priority? And what do you say to those women who haven't jumped on your two-tier recovery bus, Taoiseach, and don't have the money to go private and jump the queue? Thank you.
First of all, can I say that the introduction of HPV testing is not being long-fingered, Deputy, but it is going to be done properly to make sure that that transition works and that we don't add any further uncertainty in relation to cervical check in the future. So this decision isn't going to be rushed. The work is already underway to actually make sure that this transition happens in a way that's seamless and works. But we are not in a position to give an exact date as to when that will happen. We are in a position to say that the money is there to do that this year, and there is a process underway and a team working on that to make sure that it's done. And what we are doing in terms of focusing on a backlog and waiting times that are far too long is to increase capacity where that's possible. It's not a straightforward thing to do to increase lab capacity overnight, Deputy. Decisions had to be made in response to what was a crisis at the time, where it wasn't a soundbite, because 90,000 women. You said yourself, Deputy, that 90,000 women availed of that out-of-cycle smear test. That's not as a result of a soundbite. That's as a result of a service that was being provided by GPs that has put pressure. you're not even going to listen.
Answering the question.
You're not going to listen. That was a real commitment which resulted in real demand and real tests. It put the lab system under pressure, and that has resulted in a delay in the turnaround times. We know that. And the priority is now to get that turnaround time down, and that's what the HSE is focusing on.
Deputy Mick Wallace.